Hello, everyone. Welcome to this webinar, which is going to be on Eritrean and Ethiopian youth perspective on mental health issues. We have had one similar webinar in the past, and this is the second one, and we hope we will have a productive discussion in this presentation. It's going to be a preliminary presentation of what we gathered in terms of doing this study. And just to show you what we will be doing in the agenda for tonight, if I can have the second slide, please. The Weyera project introduction will be the first presentation that we will have, just to introduce you about this project and gives you the background, to give you a background about what we are doing. And then we will proceed on the discussion of quantitative study findings. And then we will have a Q&A open discussion session. And then we will also wind up our discussion by going through the next steps for the Weyera project. So we would like your participation and also questions you can also put in the chat. But at the same time, if you happen to unmute your mic and ask your questions, we would like you to be respectful of the time and considerate for others. Please keep your questions short and allow so that we can have as many people be able to ask their questions. So even if we can't get through the questions, please leave your email addresses in the chat, because at the end of the session, even if we can't do it today, we will be able to reach out to you with some of the responses that you have raised a question for. እንኳን ደህና መጣችሁ። ዛሬ እንግዲህ ባጭሩ የዚህ የዌራ ፕሮጀክት የሜንታል ሄልዝ ስተዲ ያገኘነውን አንዳንድ ቅድመ ሁኔታዎች ወይም የተገነዘብናቸው ነገሮች እናቀርባለን። ጥያቄ ካላችሁ ትጠይቃላችሁ። እንደጨረስን ለጥያቄና መልስ እና እንደዚሁም ለዲስከሽን ቦታውን ጊዜውን እንከፍታለን። እንኳን ደህና መጣችሁ እና I hope ጥሩ ጊዜ ይኖረናል። So I'll give the floor back to you. So, Sophia.
Hi, everybody. So some of you may know a little bit about our project, and some of you may be brand new to it. So I'll give a little bit of a review and introduction and an update of where we are. So what is the Weyera project? So it is a acronym for Wellness, Ethiopian and Eritrean Youth Exploring Resilience and Awareness. What it is a research project where we're focusing on mental health among both Ethiopian and Eritrean youth here in the Atlanta metro area. And it's led by a group of researchers. Most of us are also either first or second generation Ethiopian and Eritrean researchers, as well as some other close collaborators as well. And we're based at Emory University. So why are we doing this? Why do we do what we do? And what are exactly we trying to do? So first, we want to engage with the community. That's part of what we're trying to do here today. And that we're, as you'll see, as we talk about who's on our team, our growing team, you'll see that we're continuously engaging with Eritrean and Ethiopian youth, as well as other community leaders, community members. And we want to work together as partners to study what's going on with mental health and the mental health situation among youth in these communities. And ultimately, what our long-term goal is to get to a point where we're developing and testing potential solutions, programs to try to support mental health for our young people in these communities as well. So why are we doing that? First of all, we know we're lucky to be here in Atlanta, where there is a large Ethiopian and large Eritrean communities, right? So we know this is a big community that may need some support. And we know that Ethiopian and Eritrean youth experience unique challenges. And I think many of us can think about our own lives, our parents' lives, our families, our friends, and see different kinds of things that we might have had to face that might be different from others around us. And although we face challenges, we also see a lot of strengths in our communities too. So our families, our social structures around us, our communities all contribute to that and the support that we get. And so as we were starting to do this work a few years back, a lot of people were saying to us, you know, we're worried about mental health. We need to do something about this among our young people. But when we started to look for articles, for science about this, there was nothing out there. There's no official statistics that really break down what's going on with Ethiopian youth, Eritrean youth, separate from, but of course as a part of, but separate from other Black youth or just other young people in general in this country. So we really wanted to get more information on this. And finally, it's known, and it's something that we all believe in very strongly, that partnerships between community and universities are often beneficial, and we hope will have you know, ultimately benefit to the community more so than anything else. So who are we? So you see a lot of faces and names here as the panelists, and so I'll briefly kind of tell you who's on the call, and you can see all these beautiful and handsome faces as well. So my name is Sophia Hassan. So I'm the principal investigator on the project. I'm an infectious disease doctor and a public health researcher here at Emory in the Schools of Public Health and Medicine. The other principal investigators joining me, Dr. Janira Easley. She is an assistant professor in African American studies and has interest and expertise in kind of what we were talking about, breaking out different groups of, you know, immigrants among African Americans and understanding what those experiences are. Dr. Senait Kabada is a physician, a pediatrician with specialization in pediatrics and adolescent health. And she's also a public health scientist and founder of the International Health Consultancy. Dr. Rebecca Tesfaye is a demographer, a sociologist at Temple University in Philadelphia, who also does a lot of work around African immigrants. Tsedenia Theodoros is really all of our boss, but technically she is a public health program associate, senior, and the coordinator of this project. Then we have our amazing graduate research assistants who are all master's students in our public health program here at Rollins, Liu Barhanu, Samson Alemu, Meklit Valtamo, and Hayat Garasu. And then we have two fantastic interns, a high school student and a college student, Rediet Kiple and Amaka Mugbo. And so our team, as you see, is beautiful and growing. Okay, so again, just to give a little background of what we've done so far, and again, there may be some repetition for those of you who joined us for our last webinar, but the first thing we did, going back to February 2020, if you remember those days, we, through 2021, we first did this very quick survey, which some of you did, kind of targeting community leaders and asking, hey, do you really think, what do you think the big issues are in our community for our young people? And kind of confirmed that everyone was concerned about mental health. And then we went and did some more in-depth interviews with adolescents and young adults, as well as some focus groups and interviews with parents and with some other key community informants to get more of a sense of what exactly were the stressors, the strengths, kind of what all people were saying around mental health in the community with particular attention to youth. And so we talked about those results a little more at the last webinar, but since that time, we've gotten some additional funding from Emory University to continue to the work. We've rebranded, we have our new name, the Weyera Project. And then we've expanded to very intentionally include Eritrean youth. The first one was focused specifically on Ethiopian youth. And we formed an amazing youth advisory board who is really guiding us and giving a lot of great input on the work that we're doing. And so we'll get them introduced as well. Helen?
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Sophia. Hey, everyone. Good evening. Thanks for joining us. My name is Helen Besahaye. I am Eritrean and I'm originally from Florida. I recently moved to Atlanta after graduating with my Master of Social Work degree to work as a post-MSW fellow and one of the mental health therapists in Emory University's Student Counseling Center. I am one of the many members of the Youth Advisory Board, otherwise known as the YAB, for the Weyera project. Our other YAB members, as you can see on your screen, are Sena, Salam, Haset, Samere, and Agazit. And you can see pictures of them on the screen. The YAB is representative of just how community-based this project really is. The Weyera project has always emphasized just how important it is for Eritrean and Ethiopian youth to have a say in and help to drive the direction of the research and the work. The YAB is totally made up of Eritrean and Ethiopian youth who are originally from or currently live in Atlanta or the Atlanta area. As YAB members, we all help out with giving feedback on survey questions, recruiting for studies through our own personal connections, social media, and events in our community, helping with data analysis, and currently helping with the design of the pilot intervention that Dr. Sophia was beginning to talk about a little bit earlier, the way that we're really going to be able to put this research to work in the Atlanta community.
Okay, and so now in this phase of our project, these are kind of the next things that we're doing and that we've planned. So the biggest thing is that we've just completed our survey, which we're very excited about. So we've conducted a survey with 200 young people, 18 to 24-year-old Eritrean and Ethiopians in the Atlanta area. And I know some of you on the webinar are participants who expressed interest in hearing a little bit about the results. So we're particularly happy that you're here. And then some of our next steps are the diaspora dialogues, which Dr. Easley is going to be leading, where we're going to be facilitating conversations about racial identity between Ethiopian, Eritrean, and Black American youth. That was something that came up a lot in our initial interviews as an area to get more information about. And then the pilot intervention, again, that Helen was just mentioning is really our end goal.
And so the first part of phase 2 is our quantitative survey. And so in this image, you can see us actually recruiting at community events. And this was actually at the Ethiopian New Year's event that I'm sure some of you also attended and probably met us at that event. And so for our survey, in terms of the design, we started out by using validated scales to help make up the survey. And it was reviewed and tested with the help of our youth advisory board that are here with us today. And then we went on to participant recruitment, at which point, as Helen mentioned earlier, we did utilize the contact networks of our youth advisory board. We also used our own networks as the research team and attended several events in the community, in the Ethiopian and Eritrean communities of Atlanta. And we also recruited through our Instagram once we had changed our name and like reformulated into the Weyera project. And hopefully you guys have had a chance to look through our Instagram. And we have also contacted our phase 1 past project participants to utilize them as we were recruiting as well. And so from that point on, we have, as Dr. Sophia mentioned, we have had 200 survey participants. They filled out 2 phases of the survey. One was the eligibility survey, which just asked them certain questions to make sure that they fulfilled our eligibility criteria, like the age group for youth in terms of 18 to 24, as well as being currently in the Atlanta metro area. And once they were eligible, once we considered them eligible and they had filled it out, we then sent them the main survey. But this was all anonymous. We only collected email addresses in order to be able to provide them with the $50 gift cards. And yeah, and we also verified their responses just to make sure that we were getting 1 response per person. And these are the stats that we'll be sharing with you today are just our initial stats because we just reached our 200 survey participant max. And so we will continue to have more webinars like this as we have more results to share with you. So we're excited to share our early progress with you. Thank you for joining us.
Hey everyone, thank you for being here. So far, we introduced you our team and our project. Now let us introduce you to our participants. So we had, like Hayat said, we just reached 200 participants, and so far our analysis is gonna be our for the 195 participants that we have, and from that, 62.6% of them were Ethiopian origin, 29.7% from Eritrean origin, and 7.7% were both Ethiopian and Eritrean origins. And when we look at the gender breakdown, 123 of our participants were women, 67 were men, and 2 were gender non-conforming. Based on their sexual orientation, we had 176 heterosexuals, 13 bisexual, and 7 who were either gay or lesbians. Next slide. And we also asked our participants religion, and as you can see on the graph, Orthodox Christians were the majority, followed by Muslim and Protestant participants. One of the things we asked them about were their immigrant generation, first generations being participants who came directly from Ethiopia or Eritrea, and second generations being their parents from Ethiopia and Eritrea, and those that are born here. And those categories where we had 2 people in other category where, like one of our own, Adania, who were born here, left, and came back to the United States. And when we see their educational status, we had 131 who are either currently in college or highest level of their education was in college, which is not surprising considering our participant age group were to be in the range of 18 up to 24. This was followed by 43 high schools and 20 graduate degree and 2 vocational and technical schools. And from all the participants, we had 160 participants who are current students, like I said, based on the age group, which is not surprising.
All right, so now we're going to talk a little bit about immigration experiences and stressors that our participants indicated. All right, so one of the questions that we asked participants when we were asking about their journeys immigrating from Ethiopia or Eritrea to the US is, what are the reasons you and or your family had for moving here? So this graph shows the most common chosen results from the survey. So the most common reasons were searching for better educational opportunities, searching for better job opportunities, and fleeing conflict or political instability in their home country, with searching for educational opportunities being the most common selected reason. As you can see, 80.5% of participants indicated that one. So this is for both first and second generation participants. We also asked participants about the experiences that they had or that their families had while they were immigrating to the US on their journeys. So they were prompted with a list of different experiences, and they were asked to choose which ones apply to them or their families. And the most selected experience across the board was having to live in a different country besides Ethiopia or Eritrea while on their journey to the US. So yeah, that's the most selected one. As you can see, the graph shows the top 5 immigration experiences that were selected. But like I said, they had a lot of response options to choose from. So some of the options that they had to choose from that aren't reflected on this graph are being held in a detention facility or a refugee camp while awaiting entry to the US, having difficulty finding housing, experiencing hunger, going long periods without food during their journey, things like that. We also asked participants to rate how easy or difficult it was for either them or their parents to adjust to life in the US once they did move here. So this first graph on the left shows that about 63% of second generation participants said it was difficult or very difficult for their parents to adjust to life in the US. And the graph on the right shows results from the question that asks first generation youth, how easy or difficult was it for you to adjust to life in the US? So not their parents, but themselves. And 38% of them reported that it was difficult or very difficult. So first generation youth seem to be adjusting to life in the US easier than first generation parents. So moving on from immigrant experiences, another section of our survey was about stressors that youth experience. So the survey prompted them with a list of different potential stressors, and we asked them to rate how stressful are these things for you on a scale of not stressful at all to extremely stressful. So this list included things like having an illness in the family, having a desire for independence from their family, social relationships, romantic relationships, and a lot of different other things. But the top three stressors that youth selected were the fear of failure, the stress of grades and pressure to do well in school, and financial stress. So we also thought it was really important to note this finding that for the top chosen stressor, fear of failure, 43.6% of youth rated fear of failure as being extremely stressful, which was the highest option on the scale. So now I think we're going to do a quick poll on the data we've presented so far. So please answer the poll on the screen and then we'll quickly share the results after. We'll leave it up for about 20 more seconds. All right, so it looks like, yeah, most of you are answering that this data is not surprising. It was expected. All right, thank you.
All right, thanks, Liu. Hi, everyone. Good evening. I'm Zadenia. I hope that you can see my screen and hear me okay. So at this point, we will be talking about the mental health measures within our sample of participants. This is really the meat of our presentation today, but before we move on, I would like to acknowledge that these can be heavy and sensitive topics to discuss or think about. So this is a trigger warning for those who need to prepare themselves. We will be mentioning things like anxiety, depression, trauma, and adverse childhood experiences such as abuse and sexual assault. If these topics are difficult for you to hear or think about, we will just give you a few seconds to opt out or mute us before we move on. But in the meantime, I'm going to remind all of you again that these are early results and we haven't done more complex analyses, but we wanted to get this information out to the community early on. And we'll be sure to do this again as we have more results. So with that being said, let's get started. The first measure that we'll talk about today is anxiety. And with each of these measures, each of these outcomes, we measure them using a set of questions that make up what's called a scale. So based on how participants answer these questions, they get a score, and then that score determines the category that they fall into. So a sample of these questions for anxiety specifically is on the left of the slide. So, people were asked things like, in the last few weeks, how often have you been bothered by the following problems? Feeling nervous, anxious, or on edge, not being able to stop or control worrying, worrying too much about different things, or having trouble relaxing. And they could answer on a range from not at all to nearly every day. So the higher scores mean higher levels of anxiety if they're happening a little bit more often. And as you can see on the graph, 43% of our sample was categorized as having no anxiety, while the other 57% falls into 3 different anxiety categories, with 33% having mild anxiety, 12 in the moderate anxiety category, and then another 12 in the severe anxiety. So this does seem higher, quite a bit higher than the national statistics, which in 2019, using the same measure among 18 to 29-year-olds, found that about 20% of them had any sort of anxiety within the US. So comparing that to the 57% in our sample, there's quite a bit of a difference. Now we know a lot has happened since 2019, and the pandemic has had big effects in the mental health of young people, but it still indicates that there's a little bit of a problem. So the next thing we're going to look at here is depression. And on the left, again, are examples of some of the questions that we used for measuring depression. And, participants were asked, how often have you felt the following? My appetite was poor, nothing made me happy, my sleep was restless, and I felt sad, and so on. So a longer list of questions similar to this. And they answered between not at all and nearly every day. And as you can see the results on the right with the yellow bars, around 51% of the participants were scored low enough and were categorized as having no depression. Another 48% had low level or what is called subthreshold depression. And then around 1% had major depressive episodes or major depression. And this compares to 7%, which is the national statistic for major depressive episodes or major depression. So our sample had a slightly lower prevalence of major depression. It is, however, important to note that low-level depression, which is that second bar where 48% of our sample had low-level depression or subthreshold depression, can increase risks of having more serious depression in the future. So the next thing we looked at is PTSD, or post-traumatic stress disorder. For this, participants were asked questions like, how much have you been bothered by these problems with your repeated disturbing and unwanted memories of a stressful experience, unwanted dreams of a stressful experience, feeling like that stressful experience is happening again, or having a physical reaction as if that's happening again, etc. So it's a long list of questions like this. And, like all the other measures, these are not diagnoses. We can't, diagnosis can only be done by a mental health professional that assesses the individual situation and everything around it. But these numbers kind of give us an indication of where we could be within our community. So in our sample, 25% of youth scored high enough to be categorized as having probable PTSD. Again, this is higher than the national average of around 5 to 8% within the United States of people 18 and older. So another important thing that we really wanted to understand was whether our participants had faced adverse experiences in childhood. So this measure for adverse childhood experiences, also called ACEs, had 10 different questions, some of which are here on the left. It asks participants to respond yes or no to whether they had experienced things like physical abuse, emotional neglect, sexual assault, etc. It also asks about other difficult experiences, like whether someone in the household was using drugs, or whether someone in the household was dealing with alcoholism, or imprisoned, or severe mental health issues. And with adverse childhood experiences, research shows that people who have experienced 4 or more of these in childhood have an increased risk of things like depression and heart disease and obesity, etc. So it's really important to know how many of our sample, what proportion of our sample had experienced 4 or more adverse childhood experiences. And for us, that number was around 21%, which means 21% of youth were experiencing 4 or more adverse childhood experiences before their 18th birthday. That is, again, slightly higher than the national average of around 16%. Okay, so I know that was a lot. So we'll take a quick break here to do a poll, and then it'll give me some time to catch my breath as well. Liu, you want to go ahead?
I'll leave the poll open for about 30 more seconds. Thank you guys for answering that. I'll stop sharing.
Right, so we'll continue here. It seems like a lot of you thought these statistics were a little bit higher than you expected. So now that we know the prevalences of all these mental health outcomes, we wanted to take a closer look at, to see whether there were any differences by gender. And here I want to note that because less than 1% of our participants identified as gender nonconforming, we weren't able to include them in these analyses. So the data presented here shows differences between men and women. The teal bars represent men and the yellow bars represent women. And as you can see, all 4 mental health outcomes are higher among women than they are among men, more prevalent among women than they are among men. And the differences seem to be most pronounced in anxiety and then in depression. But when it comes to adverse childhood experiences, also, we can see that women are experiencing them at 10% higher rate than men are. And we wanted to understand why this was. So we wanted to look a little bit more closely at that. So these are the 10 adverse childhood experiences that make up the measure, like I said earlier. Again, the teal bars represent men and the yellow bars represent women. And we can see that out of the 10, actually the biggest differences are in the first 4 experiences, which means that women are experiencing swearing and insults, hitting and injury, sexual assault, and emotional neglect at a much higher rate than men are within the home. We then asked young people, how do they cope with or deal with problems with their mental health and their emotions? And the highest rated option by far, we gave them a whole long list of options, including professional and personal ways of coping. And the highest rated option by far was using creative outlets. This included things like art and sports, etc. And 63% of our sample said that they used this to cope with problems with their mental health and emotion. The next one was mind-body practices such as yoga and meditation. And then the third was individual therapy. So 26% of our sample had used individual therapy and gone to see a mental health professional. And then the fourth one was seeking advice from a religious advisor. And 24% of our sample had used this as a coping mechanism. And this was highest among Protestant Christian participants, and then followed by Muslim participants within our sample. So when it comes to seeking professional mental health care, we wanted to know, what are some of the things that are preventing them from seeking care? And Again, we gave them a list of things to rank, and the first three, interestingly, had nothing to do with infrastructure or information or financial constraints. They were more personal perceptions and attitudes that young people had. So the first one was wanting to solve the problem on their own without talking to anybody else. The second one was thinking that the problem will get better on its own. And then the third was just a general dislike of talking to people about their emotions and their mental health. And then when we come to the fourth and fifth barriers, we see that more infrastructure, informational things. So being unsure where to get care, how to sign up for care, being unable to afford care. So financial constraints come in at ranked fifth. We did have, like I said earlier, a small proportion of our participants that did use mental health services. And among those, 56% of them thought that they were either satisfied or very satisfied with those services. And then the last data thing we're going to throw at you here is social support. So we really wanted to know how much social support young people feel they have in their lives, whether it's from family members, from friends, or significant other, anyone who was in their life. And when it comes to our population, our group that we looked at, 54% of them scored in the high social support category, while the other 42% felt that they have moderate social support, and only 4% of our sample felt that they have low level of social support from those around them. And this is important because these social support can mitigate some of the effects of mental health problems. All right, so what is the significance of the study? Why did you sit through this whole presentation? Well, for us, I think it's a really big deal to have data that specifically focuses on our own communities. As far as we know, there is none or very sparse data that focuses on Ethiopian and Eritrean youth, especially within the Atlanta area. And having more data allows us to do a whole range of things. It allows us to understand how big mental health issues are within our community. It helps us inform solutions or any future interventions that we or any other interested group decides to implement. And as we know, having evidence-based interventions can increase their chances of success. And then finally, it helps us advocate for more resources and more funding for our communities because we have the data that proves that these issues exist. And the last thing I'm going to say here is these are the things that we want you to remember from our presentation. You know, from our early data, what is it that we want you to take away? First thing is that we see that a large proportion of families in our communities have gone through very difficult immigration journeys to get here to the US. And this was unsurprising to most of you. And then the second thing is that we see that mental health issues seem high in our communities, higher than national averages in many cases. And these issues are even more pronounced or prevalent among women compared to men. And then the fourth thing is that we also learned that personal perceptions about mental health, such as wanting to solve the problem on their own or not wanting to talk about their emotions, are major barriers for youth in accessing mental health care. And then finally, we want to note that Ethiopian and Eritrean youth perceive themselves as having high levels of social support from those around them. So that's it. I'll stop here. And before we go to the Q&A section, Liu will launch one more poll so that we hear from you guys one more time.
Yes. Watch that. We'll leave it open for a few more seconds. Okay, looks like most people said it was easy to understand, which is great. Thank you guys for answering that. All right, so I guess it's time for the Q&A. So right now we'll be taking any questions or comments for the next about 20 minutes, I believe. Any questions about the data that we presented today, or just any questions you have about the Weyera project. Please place your questions in the Q&A box below. They can be anonymous if you want them to be. I think you have that option when you're typing the question. And Helen will be reading them out loud for our team members to answer. If you would like to verbally share a question, you can use the raise hand function and we will unmute you, and we'll kind of go back and forth between answering Q&A questions and answering verbal questions. So yeah, feel free to ask away.
All right, so first question from Meron. How does the low-level depression among participants in this study compare against the national statistics?
I can take that one and then maybe someone else can chime in if they have a different answer. I think for that, it's not something that I've been able to find national statistics by these bigger surveys so far. So I'm not really sure how that compares, and maybe that's something that we can look at in the future. I'm not sure if someone else has a different answer.
Yeah, I agree. Helen, I think we can go on to the next question.
Okay, Aziza has a question. They want to speak aloud, so I'm gonna allow you to talk in just a second, Aziza.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, hi, my name is Aziza. Wonderful presentation. I was just curious, what are some things you guys were thinking of for future program design, or like resources that we could potentially get in the future? Like, what does that look like? Like, would it be like culturally competent therapists, or I don't know, access to like meditation and yoga, like things that help alleviate mental health struggles and things like that? I was just curious, like what resources did you guys have any in mind, like any ideas? That's all.
Sophia, do you want to take this one?
Sure. Yeah, thank you, Aziza, for your kind words, and also I already like the ideas you're throwing out there. So we've talked about this a lot, and a lot of our meetings with our youth advisory board do tend to have been about kind of brainstorming about what the things are to do, and also in response to some of the interviews and some of the information we have collected in our prior project as well. So there's a few things we're focusing on. One is trying to create some sort of mentoring program, kind of a like a peer support, but also with a mentoring component as well. Folks, particularly in the interviews we did leading up to this, had talked about kind of wanting to have some of that type of support. So that's one thing we're looking at. But then at the same time, we also want to do some things on a community level to, kind of educate folks about, what mental health strategies and resources might be out there. So kind of some of the things that you were just talking about, Aziza. So we do have like a resource guide that we'll share, but also ultimately want to create some kind of larger community level programs as well to kind of educate and inform as well. Anything else I missed you guys want to add? Okay.
No, I think you got it.
All right, so going back to the chat, another question from Meron. Is the 56% mental health service satisfaction a concern regarding the quality of mental health services?
I can start this off and then I'm sure others will chime in. I think it is a concern. I mean, the fact that it's more than 50% is something that makes me happy a little bit compared to what I expected. But from even our phase 1 work, we did hear a lot from young people that they were looking for mental health professionals that kind of matched closer to them culturally. So whether they could be Ethiopian or Eritrean or Black mental health professionals, women, religion-based, whatever it is. And so I know that that's one dissatisfaction that they mentioned with the phase 1 data, so our earlier data, our qualitative studies. But yeah, I think that is definitely something that needs to be looked at closer. Anything I missed from the team? Helen, do you think that 56% is a concern as the mental health professional?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that y'all are touching on some really important pieces about cultural competency. I mean, thinking about our community and how we have like such a niche area in terms of language, culture, things like that. Definitely a huge concern. Also, definitely something that's being talked about in the mental health communities right now. So definitely keep raising those concerns and those questions so we can keep addressing them in practice, I think. On that note, next question, also just a note, if you raise your hand, it might time out if I don't answer your question like quick enough. So please make sure that you check and see that your hand is still raised if you're using that feature. Right now, going back to the chat from Gracie, what are some practical ways we can raise awareness of these findings so that rising youth have better outcomes ahead of time?
Yeah, I mean, I can take that. I think we're still trying to figure that out, but that goes back to this community piece. So there's a piece of what we want to do that will be working directly with young people in the age range of who we survey, but then we also want to do this larger, community awareness kind of work as well. I think that a lot of the things that were talked about in our phase 1 work, things around how do we talk about mental health in the community? Do we talk about mental health in the community? How can we talk about it more so that people get help instead of, just kind of keeping things to themselves because of shame or things like that. So I think that trying to educate and change some of those norms when they're not particularly health promoting is something that we're going to be working to do in the future as well.
All right, moving along. Next question in the chat from Bethlehem. Thank you for the presentation. My question is, what is the ultimate goal of the research? Thank you.
Oh, is Dr. Sennight here? Does she want to take that one? If not, I can go ahead.
Yes, the ultimate goal is to see how best we can connect the need at the community level with resources that are required to mitigate the effect of mental health. By doing this study, what we are learning is a few things that we can take forward in terms of lessons, and then try to raise awareness in terms of coping mechanisms, and also some of the causes that are apparent or more prevalent in this community, and then see a tailored approach, kind of training can be provided at the community level, and also making sure that people are connected with resources, they know where to call, who to ask about some issues that might be that they might be facing at the family level, and also kind of organize some sort of support group if the time and resources allow. So basically the idea is how to reach the unreached services or unreached group of people in terms of requiring the need to have their mental health issues addressed.
All right. Next question from Yesh. Did you use similar survey instruments to compare yours versus the national data?
Yeah, I can take that one. For where we were able to, we did. So, and most of them, yes, we did use the same questionnaire. So there are specific scales, like I said, that we used for each of the measures. So for anxiety, depression, and adverse childhood experiences, it's the exact same questions that were used in the national data that we also used in our own survey. And then for the PTSD one, there might be slight differences.
All right, next question from an anonymous attendee. Why does it look women have mental issues than men? I'm guessing that this might be saying, why does it look like women have more mental issues than men? But anonymous attendee, please correct me if I'm wrong.
I think you're right. I don't know the answer to this question, but I'll just say that this is typically, I think this is also reflected in like national data. Generally, women seem to have higher prevalences of mental health issues than men. But for the reasons why, I will defer to someone else, maybe, who knows.
I can jump in here. There are studies which are showing that women have more prevalent mental health issues than men, and this can be tied to some of the societal and behavioral issues that can be noticed among differences between gender, and they may be vulnerable in larger scale than men, and this might predispose them to mental health issues. So one is the vulnerability. The other one is also when it comes to the economic burden in women. In most instances, usually they are the ones who are at a disadvantage. If we take, for example, in conflict ridden areas, most women are abused and they might be subjected to a lot of issues that might make them have a lot of stress than the men. So the studies have shown that usually women are maybe more vulnerable due to a number of reasons, be it social, psychological, or behavioral norms that are around their ecosystem.
Okay, next question is from someone who has their hand raised, Ahmed Hussein. I'm gonna click allow to talk and you're able to ask your question now.
If you're talking, I think you're muted.
We can come back maybe.
Okay, next question from Zodi. To those who are diagnosed as having PTSD, what was the main cause?
That's a good question. The way that the PTSD scale works, we didn't ask about specifically what the trauma that they were thinking of was, that just that they would think of, or if they felt like there was some kind of trauma in their lives, then they would answer those questions. But when we compare it to the adverse childhood experiences, we could also see that some of those things in childhood can cause or be related to trauma. So that might be part of it, but we didn't specifically ask what trauma that they experienced.
Okay, next question from God is Good All the Time as a screen name. As a parent who didn't grow up here, how can we recognize depression or help our children with coping, or how do we understand them?
I can take this one. So from what we have seen on our in-depth interview analysis so far, one of the biggest problem that our youth were saying was our parents are not willing to talk to us, or our parents, because they didn't grow up here, they don't understand the situation that we're in. We are under a lot of pressure, and that might be It might be too soon to analyze and say this is why you have to do, but from what we have seen so far, I think open communication with the children, being willing to listen to what they're facing, trying to talk to them, because that's what they have been saying so far. So that might be the first step to take: listening, talking, being open to communication, and try to understand and try to relate and try to ask them, because mostly they know what's wrong. At least they know what's happening. So it might be better to have an open communication with the youth.
Could I add on to that?
Go ahead, Simon.
All right. So one thing I want all the parents in the chat to keep in mind is that one of the biggest signs of a change in mental health is just a change in your child's baseline behavior. So while there are some more universally understood signs of mental health distress, a lot of times the symptoms can look different, and that's just based on how you have observed and know your child, and then you start seeing something different. Because there are some things that I feel that we already understand. You know, if your child isn't eating as much, that's a sign that parents typically catch on to pretty quickly. But if they perhaps, if they started having struggles with schoolwork, and the first assumption is that there's something wrong with them academically, that might be it might there might be an opportunity to explore some underlying causes that are just showing up as academic struggles. So all that to say, understanding signs of mental health distress fundamentally starts with knowing who your child is and how they normally are. That's with the open conversation, like Samson was saying, and then just being attuned to differences you notice, but then not assuming what those differences are and just asking about those differences.
All right, next question from Yared. Is there any study on these issues on other immigrant youth? It would be nice to compare.
Yes, I think there are studies that focus on different immigrant youth within the US. And I think that's our next step once we continue to do our analyses, is to see not just comparing to national data, but to compare to other immigrant groups to see how, what the differences would be among those and ours.
Just to add on to that, some of the studies that have been done in immigrant communities have shown that mostly the prevalence was higher, or there were more mental health issues among immigrants than the national population. And some of the issues that were related are the journey of the immigration and some of the cultural adjustment issues that were really quoted by some other studies, scoring higher points when it comes to the most common causes of mental stress and mental health issues among immigrant communities.
Okay, next question coming from someone with their hand raised, Aman. I have now allowed you to talk, so you should be able to unmute.
Thank you. I was wondering if you guys were able to analyze the data, the difference in the stressors from the first people who just recently came from Ethiopia or Eritrea, or people who were born and grew up here, or the difference in their stress level, or in the reasons that they give why they feel the way they feel.
I'm not sure if we looked at the data for the stressors and the difference between first and second generation participants. We did look at data for the immigration experiences, or I guess, yes, experiences that they had adjusting to the US. And those there were differences between the two generations, but I don't think we looked at stressors by generation. So unless I'm wrong, Lee, did we do that?
Yeah, I mean, I was
Right.
just gonna say, we, in general, like, we're kind of presenting just the rates and stuff, but Aman, you're totally right, and I think that's one of our big hypotheses too, is that those things are gonna be different depending on that. So that's definitely gonna be one of the next steps, but not something we've done yet.
Yeah, thank you. And more so, I was thinking along when you're going to the intervention side,
Mhm.
that will give you probably a greater indication what level of intervention, what type of intervention you have to provide for one group over the other, because
Yeah.
the two could be totally different.
Yeah, no, it's a good point.
Okay. Hermala says, given how little data there is on this matter, especially in the Atlanta area, as you all mentioned, did you refer to studies done outside of the US? For instance, referring to the work done by Fenta Haile, who did a cross-section survey in the Toronto area called Mental Health Service Utilization by Ethiopian Immigrants and Refugees in Toronto.
Yeah, I think that was one of the few studies that we were able to find, actually. We did look at that, and it was one of the more, the things that we looked at earlier to inform what we're doing now, but we also wanted more specific information, not just health service utilization, which is what that study was about, but more specific information on actual prevalences within our Atlanta community. So I think we started maybe a step back from where that study was, which is the next step of utilizing mental health services.
All right, Agar says, following up on Aziza's question, could studying coping mechanism efficacy fall into this project? It would be great to see.
Sophia, do you want to take that?
Yeah, I think definitely probably more like a next step than from the data we have. I was just trying to think about, because our study was cross-sectional, meaning just at one moment in time, we can't really tell if people using one coping mechanism then later improve their symptoms or anything like that. But I agree that would be really interesting to look at, you know, as we get into next steps.
Okay, second says, will there be interventions geared towards parents to help address the mental health of youth? For example, some of the ACEs are preventable if parents do things differently.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a recurring theme that we're hearing. So would love to do something like that in the future. I think what we've started to talk about in more detail now has been more the direct stuff with youth, but definitely from the focus groups, from, you know, the comments from you guys, what we're hearing from the community, I think that's going to be important in the future.
Sabrina says, not sure if this was mentioned already, but since you guys talked about the importance of cultural competence in mental health, do you all have any estimate of how many Habesha therapists or mental health professionals are in the US and or in Georgia?
I'm going to say no, we don't have an estimate, but there is a group that was compiling a database of mental health professionals within the US that are Ethiopian or Eritrean and speak different languages. And I remember seeing that resource online. I can see if we can find it, but they have, I think they even indicate like what state they're licensed in and what languages they speak and things like that. So, but we don't have that data.
Elda says, what was your expectation or prediction compared to the results?
I think this is going to be a personal opinion on my end. I didn't have expectations just because this is something that is completely exploratory for me. I mean, anecdotally, we know that mental health is something that's not talked about within our families and our communities. It's sort of a taboo topic. And so I don't know if I'm surprised that it exists amongst us, but I think I'm surprised that how high it is. So yeah, it's not expected for me.
Ahmed says, the group you are studying appear to have strong family or community support. Is there a way that you can conduct a study to isolate the positive contribution of this factor?
Yeah, I think in a few different ways. So I think one we could do and will do, I think, different analyses, right? So statistical analyses with the data we have, we can look at some of the associations with social support because we did measure that, as you saw. And then I think the other thing is that we are trying to incorporate it into the intervention that we're developing. So both from the interviews we had done in phase 1 and from seeing how, you know, big social support was here, trying to make sure that that's incorporated into whatever we do, because it is a strength of our culture and our community. And so always makes sense to build on strengths when trying to make things better.
That is all the questions that we have at this moment.
Right, that was great. I will let Liu take on the next part. So Liu, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you all for all your questions. So before we close today, we wanted to share what's next for the Weyera project. I see that was a question that was coming up often in the chat, so we're happy to share with you. So like Samson said earlier, we've recently reached 200 participants, and so our survey is now closed, but we're going to continue more in-depth data analysis of these findings. Like we said, the data that we showed you today was a preliminary analysis. We will continue to develop our pilot project that we mentioned earlier and eventually test it in the community, which is really exciting. We are going to start the diaspora dialogues as well. And finally, we will eventually publish papers with all of our findings. And some quick acknowledgements for today. So we want to acknowledge our funding source, the Bidirectional Global Health Disparities Research Pilot Grant through the Emory Senior Vice President for Research Office. We want to acknowledge all the Ethiopian and Eritrean student associations at these different schools, Emory University, Georgia State, University of Georgia, for spreading the word about the webinar and our study. Similarly, Abisha Networks, we want to acknowledge for giving us a booth at their New Year's event to help us recruit participants for the study. Eritrean and Ethiopian community associations, you guys helped us amplify the study to our community, so we want to thank you for that. The members of the Refugee Women's Network for promoting the study to their community members. And last but not least, our study participants. Thank you guys so much for dedicating your time and sharing your vulnerable experiences for this study. So thank you all. And thank you all for attending today. So we have a QR code here that links to a feedback survey about today's presentation. We would really appreciate if you could all take the time to fill it out. It's a very quick survey. It would be really helpful for us as we, continue in the next steps of our project. And be sure to connect with us on Instagram, follow us on Instagram, connect with us through email as well. And we have a resource guide available. Some of you may remember from our first dissemination webinar, we presented to you our resource guide, and that was kind of the first draft of it. It's been updated since then, and we're still continuing to update it. So it contains information for our community about mental health resources in the Atlanta area, how to access them, how much they cost, things like that. So we're working on updating it, and we hope to share it at a later date. So if you would like to receive the updated version of the resource guide once it's complete, you can fill out the feedback survey, and one of the questions in the survey is it'll ask for your email, so you can enter your email there. You can also enter your email in the chat box to receive the resource guide by email if you prefer. So Either way is good. Yeah.
And we can stick around for a little bit since we have some time if there are people that have questions to answer some of those questions. And I'll send the link to the survey in the chat while people ask their questions.
There was one hand raised.
Yeah, for when it's the guy, I'm gonna unmute you right now. Give me just 1 second. You should be able to unmute now.
If you're talking, you're still muted.
Everyone, did you have a question? Can you hear us? Okay, maybe not.
Yeah, I see people are on. It may still be confusing. So so we are done with our webinar. Thank you all for joining. If anybody does want to stick around and answer a question, you're free to do so. But otherwise, we've I think we're done, and hope everyone enjoys their evenings. And would appreciate any feedback through the survey that the link is in the chat.
Yeah, I think there was one hand raised. Yeah.
Say that again.
There is one person raised.
Oh yes, Ms. Anu.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
First and foremost, outstanding, a really great project, and making sure that there's a clear awareness of this incredibly important subject. So again, my heartfelt thanks to you guys. I was just wondering, I'm in the medical device industry. What can we help from both from a personal level as well as from the industry to our community?
Wow, I appreciate the comment and the question. I don't know if Dr. Senai, do you have a good answer?
I think the way to help is we have a subcommittee on health, and we would love if someone who has some resources and related to health work join us. So you can join the health subcommittee within the association. I know we have one at the Ethiopian community, and I'm sure there might be something also within the Eritrean community. But within the Ethiopian community, we will be very happy if you can join the health team, because we are just starting to discuss how else we can be organized, how much resources are out there, what kind of talents are there, that we can connect the community to these resources in such a way that we can come together and see what we can offer. So we will be very happy to be connected with you through that channel.
Great, thank you.
Thank you so much.
If I can add on to that briefly, in this discussion of help and resources, I also want everybody to keep in mind that our community is also a resource. And I say that to say that the community is not this abstract concept. The community is the people that are a part of it. And if we to be a part of the solution, we can start by making shifts in either how we perceive mental health or even just how we talk about it. And what that can look like practically is having the courage to have those open conversations with people you trust, and then from there being able to expand that network. It's like this metaphor that says, a candle doesn't burn itself out by lighting another candle. In the same way that if we individually shift how we perceive and talk about mental health among each other, that light gets spread and it brings light into the darkness that we may find ourselves in.
I like that a lot, Samara. It reminds me of, I a lot of my work is in the HIV field, and we talk about stigma and HIV, a lot. And one thing that I always say in that setting is, that it's our job to speak up if we hear someone saying stigmatizing things. And I think the same thing holds true here. If we hear someone saying something about someone being crazy or putting someone down for getting help for mental health or something, instead of just, and if we don't agree with that, like, we should, be vocal about that, right? And we should say, oh, that's not true. And, that doesn't make you weak. And this is a good thing. And people should get help and all this kind of stuff, because that's how, people over time can change norms. So I think that's really important.
Right, I think we've addressed all the questions. So if there is nothing else, we can go ahead and end the webinar. Is there anyone else that wants to say anything else before we close out?
I think we just have to thank you, everybody, for showing up and being able to stick with us to the end. Please, if you have any questions, our Weyera project website and Instagram is there to connect with us. And we thank you for your time to be here, and hope that we can also come back and share the final results with you, and continue to work with the community to address this issue better. I don't know, Sophia, if you would like to say anything.
I was just gonna, before we do that, sorry, Dr. Sennight, there's a question that says, where can I learn more? We'll make sure to send, if you do put your email address in the survey that we sent out, we'll make sure to send some of our presentation here, and make sure that we put this also online, so the recording of the presentation online, so that you can have access to it. We're also very available on Instagram and through our email, so you can email us as well. And I can share my screen so that the email address is visible for everybody. Sorry, Sophia, if you had something to say, I cut you off.
Oh, no. I think we've covered it. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.